and production economics associate with Cornell Cooperative Extension's Eastern New York program. So I cover mostly fruit and vegetable production in the eastern part of the state. And I've been grant funded myself for years, and have worked with a lot of businesses for the last 30 years on looking for grants. So hopefully this will be helpful. So let me just start my thing and we will get going. Great. So how to write a successful grant for your agritourism operation. My goal with this right now is to help you identify what is a good project, for grant funding, because not everything in your agritourism operation is as equally likely to be fundable by a grant. And I'll go more into that in a moment. Where to start looking for funds for agritourism. The one challenge with grant funding is a lot of grant programs change, or they can come, they can go. So I think what I'm really going to focus on today is having a strategy and an approach, rather than giving you like a million different places you should look, because they could be obsolete by tomorrow. Things to think about to determine if a specific grant program makes sense for your business, because not every grant makes sense. And then steps you should take to be ready to apply, because one of the challenges of doing grant funding is, a lot of times you'll see the grant, and by the time you see it, it's over. You don't have time to really put together a good application. So there are things you can do as a business to make yourself sort of more grant ready, so that when you see an opportunity, you're ready to take advantage of that opportunity. And then what makes a project more likely to be a winner, and how to write sort of strategically think about writing grant proposals. Oops. So the first thing I want to start with is my assumption of people who are here, and this may or may not be true for you, is that you're a for-profit commercial farm or ag business that's seeking grants to strengthen your agritourism business. And the reason I start with this caveat is because if you're a nonprofit or a municipality, you may have very different reasons for going after grants than a for-profit does. So I'm really assuming that is who you are, and sort of what I have after this follows based on that. So let's talk about that. So like, really, when you think about it, grants are just like any other thing you have with a business. If you're getting money from somebody, you're probably giving them something in return, right? So in general, if you're a for-profit business, when you get sales revenue, whoever is giving you that is getting a product or experience. You are selling something and they're getting something for the money that you're taking in. If you go to the bank and you get a loan, you are then giving the bank interest and fees. If you have an investor in your business, you're giving them a share of the profits or dividend or ownership, some sort of stake. And so when you get a grant, what are you giving, right? And I think I really want to start there, because there are very few people just sort of wandering around, just randomly handing out money to people, besides maybe your parents, right? Like, in general, grant funders want something too. Most grants, like especially if you're a for-profit business, they have some sort of social or community purpose that and they want you as a business to achieve that in order to get the funding. And so you have to ask yourself, why is this agency or organization or government entity offering this grant for farmers or agritourism businesses? Why are they taking this money and giving it to a business? And what goal are they trying to achieve? And so I think when you think that way, it helps you start to think about, like, who might give me money for my business? What do I contribute that isn't the product that I sell, or the good that I sell, that gives still something that people get something in return. And generally the purpose for grants to businesses are for job creation. They have some sort of like larger benefit to the community. So it's often job creation, economic vitality. They sort of want to raise all boats. It could be for accessibility, to make, businesses more accessible to people who are either disabled or who maybe are more socially disadvantaged, to allow them to participate in activities. It could be for environmental conservation that will give you a grant so that you will go kind of above and beyond in protecting the environment. It could be for local history. If you're tied to a larger historic region, you may be able to get a grant to somehow tie your business to that sort of desire to sort of create this larger historical area. So there's all of these different reasons, but from a public perspective, why somebody might give a business a grant. But these tend to be some of the major ones. And so I made a list here of the types of grants that are likely to be applicable to an agritourism business. So the key one is really going to be local economic development grants, and that could be from your county economic development office. It could be a town or city economic development office. It could be a regional economic development grant. And they tend to fund things. If you're a really big, let's say you're doing like a major investment, like a hotel, and there's a lot of infrastructure, and you're doing multi-million dollars, there could be some support because of so much infrastructure and construction that's going on. There could be some small grants for infrastructure, but those are usually for larger projects with more of a kind of a larger sort of multiplier effect, you could say. But often local economic development grants could be for promotion. They'll help you promote the business, for safety, for workforce training, and then a lot of grants for planning to like help you sort of plan your business. Local regional tourism also, will often out grants. Those also tend to focus on promotion, planning, maybe small projects. If you're part of an industry association, like a wine trail association or a maple association, or there could be like a grants for members, once again, usually for promotion or for something to kind of help draw people to buy more or to participate more with that industry's product, or for workforce development. Environmental grants through, either private foundations for like stormwater, for, to protect water quality, for pollinators, for climate change resiliency, maybe, if you're in a floodplain, energy efficiency. So being aware of sort of the place you're in and what kind of environmental either benefits you can provide, to wildlife or what kind of hazards are there from an environmental perspective that you might look for a grant to protect yourself from. Private foundations are more likely to fund quirky stuff. They, don't tend to be funders of for-profit businesses as much, but they are likely where you're maybe like there could be a grant, maybe to make your agritourism more accessible to people with disabilities, or for conservation. History might be something that you could promote, or to bring disadvantaged youth, so thinking those sort of ways of, there's usually going to be some, some benefit there. But the private foundations tend to be quirkier. Workforce development grants, usually through economic development for maybe employee training, especially if you have a large number of employees. And then historic preservation grants. And I put in parentheses federal and state tax incentives, because actually, often some funding isn't really as a grant, written as a grant, but more like the tax code is a way of also providing some money back for things. So I'm focused on grants, but tax incentives are actually for-profit businesses, where you're more likely in some cases to see some cash back. But that could be for historic barn preservation, historic building preservation. There could be grants to to sort of, especially if you're in a, like a main street, they're trying to redevelop, or a redevelopment area, or you've got something that's really, really historic and interesting. So, but you got to think outside the box, right? Like there aren't going to be tons and tons of just like grants for agritourism. They're going to be for a specific thing, and it's generally going to be around sort of larger sort of promotional efforts, I think, or, environmental or conservation. So here's a couple of examples, just so you can get a little bit better of a sense of what I'm talking about. if you are in, I live, my, where I live is in the New York City watershed. So this is the area that I know better. But they have, if you are in the west of Hudson watersheds and you're a business, they have the Catskill Fund for the Future, and that's a grant program that comes out, I think, every year. And it provides grants and low interest loans for economic development activities in the New York City west of Hudson watersheds. And so those could be for like facade improvements or small investments in businesses. And it's really to try to make those watershed communities more economically resilient. And also they fund things like, if you've been damaged by floods or you're in a flood hazard area, there have been rounds of funding also for businesses to be more flood resilient. But so if your business is there, those could be, they do fund tourism, and agritourism is something that they're very interested in because the Catskills is definitely a tourist region. The big one for tourism, Market New York is a grant program. And they fund projects that provide, increasing tourism throughout the state. So this is really from a state perspective, one of the big pots of money. But you'll notice that a lot of the funding, the eligible entities are more like nonprofit corporations, tourism promotion agencies, municipalities. And so one strategy, and this is true for a lot of grant programs, you as an independent business, for-profit business, may not be able to apply directly for these funds, but by working with your local tourism promotion agency, and especially if you're trying to sort of build a cohesive sort of agritourism presence within a region, that a tourism promotion agency could write a grant to Market New York around marketing. So let's say you're you're a sheep farm and you do wool, and you also, have an agritourism business where people can come and, learn how to, spin and learn more about fleece. And there's several other wool producers, and you could create a wool trail and maybe get funding through Market New York. And what the funding can be used for is a little bit like, it can be some, sort of infrastructure. It could also be for promotion, advertising. It kind of, the grants really vary depending on the scale of the project. Another example, and this is sort of the thinking outside the box, the NYCAM, the New York Center for Ag Health and Medicine, has what they call the John May Safety Fund, and it provides matching funds to small and mid-sized farm operations for repairs and upgrades that make a safer workplace. And so, an agritourism workplace could have still all, especially if it's on a farm, can have safety hazards. Maybe you need better, livestock handling facilities, or maybe there are areas where you want to keep the public separate from the animals, or you need, something that, things that can make it safer. And then, they're small grants, it's up to $5,000, but still this is, they also will do a safety sort of assessment. And, like when you're bringing people onto your farm business, the more you can like sort of go out of your way to reduce hazards, it's good for insurance, and it's good for liability. So that's, liability is something that you're concerned about as an agritourism enterprise. The Hudson River Estuary Program, they have a funding source along the Hudson. Once again, the funds go to nonprofits or municipalities, but those grantees can then turn around and say, like, maybe if in a Hudson River waterfront town, you have some agritourism operations that want to also sort of do a, promotion of the Hudson history as part of the agritourism, you might be able to apply for funding. So you got to, as I said, you're sort of thinking, the key thing with this is trying to think sort of how your business fits within a region and what might be regional priorities that you and maybe other farms like you can approach a local economic development entity or a municipality to work together with you to apply for funds for these types of projects. The key thing here, and I keep talking about economic development regions, New York, has divided the state into different economic development regions. And one of the first places to start, besides your local county economic development agency, is to look at that regional economic development plan and see what the priorities are within your region. Talk to the staff within that region, because a lot of the state funding goes through those regional economic development councils. And so that could be a way for you as an agritourism business to leverage maybe a larger project that is being thought of within that region. So, so be aware that's, at least for state funding, that and your local tourism agency. And there's a list of those also. I'll make it available also to Lindsay and Laura to get out to you, but in New York, but every state has these sort of the same process with tourism, that you have these local tourism agencies, they get state funding, and then they then use that money to really promote businesses that are tourism business within their region. So the key thing though is, just because you're eligible for something doesn't mean that your project is fundable, right? Like not everything gets funded. So you want to spend your time applying for grants that are really a good match for your agricultural business and have a reasonable chance of getting funded. So you want to think about how closely does your project fit in with the entity's goal? Because the more closely your project and what you're thinking about fits in with their goal, the more likely you are to get funded. If you're trying to squeeze something in just because it's eligible, but it doesn't seem like it's really what they want to see, you're less likely to get funded. It's kind of I think, somewhat of a no-brainer. So one of the things whenever I'm looking at a grant that I do is I try to calculate my odds of getting funded before I waste my time putting together a proposal. So I want to know, like, if there's a grant fund, what percentage of applications get funded? Is it a pretty high percentage? Like if I put a proposal in, am I very likely to get funded? Or is it a really like kind of a long shot? Because if it's a long shot, it's got to be a better proposal and a really high priority. Whereas if it's pretty much anybody who puts anything reasonably in, it's a lot of little grants, then, I have a sense of like sort of effort to reward. How much money is available and what's the largest grant size? So this helps me calculate about how many grants are likely to get funded. And is my project, if I can see who's gotten funded in the past, is my project comparable to projects that have been funded? So I can get a sense of like, once again, what kind of now sometimes it's good, like not seeing a project like yours. Also, if it can be an opportunity too. So I'm not saying you should try to duplicate what everybody's done, but you just want to kind of get a sense of what kinds of things have they funded and then look at their priorities. But if they say they're like, if they mostly have been funding like local restaurants and manufacturing businesses, but they say agritourism is a priority and they haven't funded any agritourism, then I would highlight the fact that I'm, an agritourism business and this, they haven't funded a lot yet, so they should fund me. Are there priority groups or are there priority regions for funding? And I think especially for state economic development grants, that's really important because sometimes they do have target areas or, based on income or based on like how, unemployment rates or they want to spread the money around, so am I in an area that is a targeted area for funding, or am I part of a group that's a targeted group for receiving funding, whether it's the size of the business or whether it's a woman-owned business or like, is there, or a startup business versus an experienced business, or a business with a lot of employees versus a business with a few employees. So what kind of groups are they looking for? Excuse me, sorry about that. So I think there are 4 steps though, in order to be ready. Because I said it's the key thing with grants is because they tend to be ephemeral and they sort of come along, you really need to be ready if you want to sort of get in the grant game. And so the 4 key steps to be ready are, first, having a business plan in place. And it doesn't have to be this ginormous tome, but a lot of times, grant applications want the information that's in a business plan. And so if you have this ready, you've got some sections sort of pre-written, and that plan should include a description of the business, the key staff and their qualifications, 3 years of financial statements, and a I like to say like a 5-year plan, right? So what, you want it in your plan, what kind of projects or upgrades are needed to your business to make it more successful? What are your goals for the business? And when I say a goal, I mean, especially mean like a SMART goal, like, do you want to see to grow your business by 10%? Are you looking to raise your revenue by, 15%? Are you looking to transfer the business within 5 years? And then areas where improvements could be made. Maybe these are not high priorities, but when you think about your business, especially given this list of things that grantors generally fund, where are there places where improvements could be made that you could use grant funding for, whether it's environmental, like maybe, improving the environmental qualities of your land, or in safety or in workforce, so that if you see something that's a fit, you're ready to go. And then having like some of your key projects, having some budgets for those key projects, like a sense of what the cost would be. They don't have to be like hugely detailed, but kind of a sense of the scope, so that you could look at a grant and see, like, is this likely to be a fit or not? Does it meet my needs? And then update, like if you do this, sort of keep it updated regularly too, so you're ready to go. The other key thing, and I think I touched on this earlier, but it's really important to have a network, because a lot of grants, you're not, a business by yourself are not going to be competitive for. You are going to get grant funding sometimes because you're part of a larger initiative within a region. And also you often then, when you're writing a grant proposal, you need letters of support and commitment. And networking helps you learn about funding opportunities. So you want to start really, if you just sort of sit on your farm by yourself, not talking to anybody, not sharing what you're doing, not really seeing, thinking about collaborative opportunities, you might be really good at your own business, but you're not really going to be that successful, like getting grant funding probably. So I would start to like reach out to business advisors, like your small business development centers, cooperative extension, non-economic development nonprofits, historic nonprofits. Like, be aware of like what's going on in your region, start to get involved. Collect information from your customers or potential customers, what they're looking for, so that you have some documentation that this enhancement is something that would be likely to, promote your business, or that you have already established a customer base, people you buy or sell from, if that's relevant. Having a sense of like where you would source something from. Like if you're going to do a new website, who would you use to do the website? Like, who does these things? So that you're ready to, you're ready to contract with somebody if there's a grant opportunity available. Being involved with sort of in your sort of network, being involved with finding out what the regional tourism initiatives are, getting involved with your commodity organization, and then other industry groups like wine trails, there's a cut flower association. So really just having a good network. I think that is one of the keys to being really successful sort of in that grant writing sphere. And then start to make a list of possible sources of funding and the timing of grant announcements. So, you're going to see things that you missed, but make a note of it anyway and say, like, this RFP came out in November last year, and getting a sense of sort of what the calendar is of different grant opportunities, because time is going to be limited. And so you want to kind of be able to anticipate sources of funds that are coming, rather than reacting kind of at the last minute. So you want to get on email lists and sort of make a file folder of, like grant notices you've seen that might be interesting, talking to those advisors in your networking about your key projects, then asking what source of funding, and keep notes, and then just keep in touch. And then for funds that are available annually, start working on the proposal even before the notice comes out, so that you're more ready. Because a lot of times, your busy schedule, and I see this with a lot of ag grants, they're due like right in the middle of the busy season. And it's at that point, you don't have the bandwidth to put a proposal together. So the more you can kind of start to pull together the pieces, when something comes along, you're more ready to go. And then the other thing that people don't think about, but that's critical with grants, is that make sure you can access credit or have adequate cash for match your upfront costs. A lot of times there's sort of this assumption that you get a grant and then all of a sudden you get a pile of money. But most grants require cash match, especially for for-profit businesses. They want to see that you have some skin in the game and that this is something that's valuable to you. So you're very, very unlikely in most situations to see something that covers 100% of something, especially if that thing is like a supply or infrastructure or, more tangible. It might cover like the full cost or a lot of like writing a plan or some promotional stuff. But for anything that's like more, that you can touch or feel, you're probably going to have to come up with a cash match. You're probably going to need to be able to prove that you have the funds to do the cash match. And this is increasingly, I'm seeing this as a requirement for grants. And I think what had happened over the years is people got grants that are reimbursable or have cash match. And then it turns out that the entity isn't able to come up with that money, and then they can't give the money to them because they can't do the match. So usually they're going to want to see a letter from a bank or a bank statement or something that you can definitely come up with the match. And then, like if you can get a letter from a lender that they'll give you a loan based on the grant funds, that also can do that. And then most grants are paid, or many grants are paid on a reimbursement basis. So you're gonna have to lay the money out and then wait to be reimbursed. And so if you can't lay the money out, then you can't do the project. So making sure that you're aware of that, you have some access to credit, access to cash, access to loans, in order to do the project. So with all this, you can see that getting grant funding, it's work. This is actually another job. This isn't just, it isn't easy, and it does take time. And so you always need to, like when you're writing a grant, balance the effort of applying and managing the grant with the benefit of receiving the money. Because that's the other thing. I know I've been in this situation, and I've talked to people who've gotten grant funding, and then it turns out, for that $5,000 they get, they end up putting $10,000 of effort into it. So you always have to say, like, could I just do this easier without a grant, or is there other ways to do this? Because there can be a lot of commitment to this. I think the best grant funded projects, if I'm trying to think of like something to get grant funding for my business, they would fund something discrete that I know that I need for my business, and I would be kind of likely to want to or try to buy it anyway, because then I know when I get the funds and I go out and get it, it's something that's useful. And even if I have to jump through some hoops for it, it's definitely fits in with my business. Whereas something that's more of an add-on and maybe like a program, and it has a lot of moving pieces and not a lot of sort of, and it's sort of in addition to what I would ordinarily do, some of those can end up like just being this ginormous thing that you weren't anticipating. You want activities that are in alignment with your overall business strategy. So like if you want to be an organic farm, organic certification cost share grant makes sense because it just reduces your cost of doing business. It isn't an add-on cost, it's a saving you money thing. So the other thing is, and this is especially true with state grants, but sometimes foundation or nonprofit grants, make sure that the grant doesn't add too many costs onto the project for compliance. So sometimes a state grant or like New York City watershed grants, they'll want like prevailing wages, for the people you hire to do the infrastructure work, or a unionized or local workforce, or require a certain level of energy efficient equipment, or have specific standards or certifications, or require a lot of documentation. So you might need to like get a higher level bookkeeper or hire somebody for that. Or they might even, if it's a big enough grant, require an audit or specific financial records, that your system right now can't really supply. So you end up then having to hire people or upgrade software in order to comply, which is a cost you may not have anticipated. And then you want to make sure that the project is something that makes business sense. It's really easy to say, well, it's free money. I'm just getting money to do this. I'd like to convert my entire farm over to something that is totally accessible for the blind and have a blind experience, whatever, which is great. Like, it would be awesome to do that. But then you realize that, like, with all the other things you have to do, you don't really have the resources to do it. But if you write a grant to do something, you're going to sign a contract to do the work. You are under a contractual obligation. And some funders, it's hard to change the scope of the project after it's funded. So you might not have the flexibility to sort of shift gears if what you want to do changes. And the time and resources that you put into that grant project are time and resources for your business you can't put somewhere else. And so that's just something to be aware of. Make sure that it does totally make sense for you. So the tips for a proposal is make sure you read the information and determine how you'll be evaluated. Follow all the directions, make sure you include important information. And then finally, make sure you understand the grant requirements. Make sure you are on the hook for this project if it gets funded. And so, to go into a little more detail, if you write a proposal yourself, have somebody else look at it, tell a compelling story, use that intro or summary to give the who, what, where, why, how, and then the ask, and that sets the tone then for whoever's reading. Don't forget to include relevant experience about you or your partners on the project that indicate you're competent to do the work. Because I've seen this when I review proposals. It could be a great idea, but if it's proposed by somebody who's inexperienced with no technical assistance providers, it might not get funded, because even though it's an excellent idea, we don't have a lot of confidence that you can actually go through with it. So you want to make sure that you explain how, especially if it's a new area for you, how you have the capacity to actually carry this thing out. Don't skip, and I see this a lot when I review too. If you have a proposal and there's a format, don't skip detail in the parts of the proposal where you're answering questions that are part of the scoring, even if you've already feel like you've addressed that somewhere else. Because if you're a reviewer looking at a lot of proposals, and then you see a proposal that said that is sketchy, like usually you're looking for key things in key sections. And just because it's like referenced somewhere else, I might forget that when I'm looking through like hundreds of applications. So don't make the reviewers dig around and make assumptions. If it's answer the questions, so that you maximize your points. Make sure what you're asking is reasonable given the size and scale of your business. I've seen people who've got a business that's generating like $10,000 a year ask for $300,000 in some USDA grants. And it's like, dude, like you haven't earned that much ever, like you're basically asking for, 3-4 years worth of income, and so just because the maximum of the grant is really high doesn't mean you should ask that. It should be reasonable. And then don't overpromise. So don't put more things in that you can really do for the amount of money. But then on the other hand, don't get greedy. Don't ask for a ridiculous amount of money to to where you're really not going to do that much either. Most reviewers can tell when a project either isn't feasible. So somebody's asking for $10,000 to do $1 million worth of work. I mean, that makes no sense. Or when they're asking for $10,000 to do $300 worth of work. You want to see reviewers want to see a clear, well thought out project from a competent person with a high likelihood of success and a reasonable budget. That's really what they want to see. And with that, I guess I can go over to questions.